The desert sun blazed mercilessly over forward operating base Iron Ridge, casting harsh shadows across the concrete barriers and razor wire that separated civilization from chaos. Staff Sergeant Rachel Blackwood stood at the edge of the motor pool, watching a group of male soldiers gather around their armored vehicles like hunters preparing for the kill. Their tactical gear was pristine, their conversations loud with the kind of swagger that comes from never having your competence questioned. Rachel's uniform told a different story, worn but impeccable, every crease sharp enough to cut glass, boots polished to mirror shine despite the desert dust that coated everything else on the base. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 28, Rachel had spent 6 years in the Army, with 2 combat deployments and a service record that should have commanded respect. Instead, she found herself the subject of whispered jokes and dismissive glances from soldiers who'd never seen half the action she had. Her fellow servicemen had given her a nickname that followed her like a shadow through every corridor of the base: Pretty Princess. The name had started as a cruel joke about her appearance. Rachel was undeniably attractive, 5'6", with auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, green eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of natural beauty that made some people assume she'd never had to fight for anything in her life. What they didn't see were the scars hidden beneath her sleeves, the calluses on her hands from countless hours of weapons training, or the steel in her gaze that came from staring down death more times than most soldiers twice her age. Princess. The voice cut across the motor pool like a whip crack. Corporal Jake Sullivan emerged from behind a Humvee, his face split by the kind of grin that never reached his eyes. At 24, Sullivan was everything the Army seemed to value in a soldier: tall, broad-shouldered, loud, and absolutely convinced of his own superiority. His uniform bore the patches of someone who talked a good game, but had never been tested when it really mattered. Shouldn't you be getting ready for the beauty pageant? Sullivan continued, loud enough for everyone in the motor pool to hear. Several soldiers chuckled, the sound carrying that particular edge of cruelty that men use when they want to establish their dominance over someone they perceive as different. Rachel didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing any reaction only encouraged them. Just checking the vehicle maintenance schedule, Sullivan. Someone has to make sure these machines actually work when lives depend on them. Right, because that's what princesses do. They check maintenance schedules, Sullivan shot back. When are you going to realize this isn't summer camp? This is a war zone, sweetheart. Maybe it's time to consider a transfer to somewhere more suitable for your skill set. The comment hit exactly where Sullivan intended. For the past 8 months, Rachel had been systematically excluded from combat operations, despite being one of the most qualified soldiers on the base. Her training records showed expert marksmanship, advanced combat tactics, and a psychological profile that described her as exceptionally calm under pressure with superior tactical awareness. Yet somehow, she kept finding herself assigned to administrative duties, equipment checks, and support roles that kept her far from any real action. Near the command building, Rachel could see Colonel Frank Donnelly briefing a group of soldiers for the day's patrol. Donnelly was a career officer in his late 40s, with the soft look of someone who'd spent more time behind desks than in the field. His voice carried that particular brand of authority that came from rank rather than respect, and his approach to leadership seemed to involve surrounding himself with soldiers who never challenged his decisions. Remember, gentlemen, Donnelly's voice carried across the compound, we're dealing with increased terrorist activity in Sector 7. Intelligence suggests ISIS elements are regrouping under a new commander. I want tight formations, constant communication, and no unnecessary risks. Rachel found herself walking closer to the briefing, drawn by the mention of terrorist activity. This was exactly the kind of mission she'd trained for, the reason she'd joined the Army in the first place. Her expertise in insurgent tactics and urban warfare could make the difference between mission success and catastrophe. As the briefing concluded, Rachel approached Colonel Donnelly. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for the patrol. My experience with insurgent tactics could be valuable for this type of operation." Donnelly looked at her with the expression of someone who'd been interrupted by a child asking to play with the grown-ups. "Sergeant Blackwood, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this mission requires experienced combat personnel. Perhaps you could assist with communication support from the base." "Sir, with respect, I have 2 combat deployments and advanced tactical training." "My service record," "Your service record," Donnelly interrupted, "shows that you're better suited for support roles. Leave the field work to soldiers who are built for it." His eyes swept over her dismissively, the implication clear. In his mind, her gender automatically disqualified her from serious combat consideration. Sullivan, who had been listening nearby, couldn't resist adding his commentary. "Come on, Princess. You wouldn't want to break a nail out there, would you?" The laughter that followed felt like sandpaper against Rachel's pride. She'd heard variations of this conversation dozens of times over the past months. Each rejection felt like another brick in a wall that seemed designed to keep her trapped in roles that utilized about 10% of her actual capabilities. As the patrol team loaded into their vehicles, Rachel stood watching from the same spot where her day had begun. The soldiers climbed into their Humvees with the confidence of men who'd never had their qualifications questioned based on their appearance. Their gear clanked with the familiar sounds of preparation, radios crackled with status updates, and engines roared to life with the promise of action. Rachel remained behind, officially assigned to base security coordination, a euphemism for sitting in an air-conditioned office, while others did the work she'd trained her entire career to do. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid, but she'd learned to keep her expression neutral. Showing emotion would only give them more ammunition for their assumption that she was too fragile for real military work. Walking back toward the administrative building, Rachel passed the base's small fitness area, where several off-duty soldiers were working out. She could hear fragments of their conversation, punctuated by the clang of weights and the thud of heavy bags being struck. "Did you see Princess trying to get on Donnelly's patrol?" One voice said with amusement. "Yeah, what's next?" "Is she going to volunteer for Special Forces?" Another replied, triggering a round of laughter. "I heard she scored expert on the rifle range," a third voice added, though it sounded more puzzled than impressed. "So what?" "Shooting paper targets isn't the same as real combat. When the bullets start flying, you need someone you can count on, not someone you have to protect." Rachel paused outside the entrance to the administrative building, her hand on the door handle. The conversation continued behind her, each word a reminder of the impossible situation she found herself in. She was trapped in a cycle where she couldn't prove her combat effectiveness because she wasn't allowed into combat, and she wasn't allowed into combat because others assumed she couldn't handle it. The administrative building felt like exile. Rachel spent the morning reviewing supply requisitions while the sounds of base activity filtered through the windows. Helicopters landed and departed, vehicles moved in out of the compound, and the constant radio chatter reminded her of all the action happening without her participation. Master Sergeant Carmen Rodriguez found her there 3 hours later, sitting at a metal desk surrounded by paperwork that could have been handled by any clerk with basic computer skills. Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran with a reputation for fairness and a no-nonsense approach to leadership that had earned her respect throughout the base. "This is complete bullshit," Rodriguez said without preamble, setting a cup of coffee down next to Rachel's keyboard. "You sitting here pushing papers while half-trained boys play soldier in the field." Rachel looked up from her reports. Rodriguez was one of the few people on the base who seemed to see past the pretty princess reputation to the soldier underneath. "Orders are orders, Sergeant," Rachel replied, though the words tasted bitter. Orders based on what? Rodriguez shot back. I've seen your file, Blackwood. I've seen your training scores, your psychological evaluations, your performance reviews from your previous deployments. You should be leading patrols, not filing supply requests. The validation hit Rachel harder than she expected. After months of being dismissed and marginalized, having someone acknowledge her actual qualifications felt like being thrown a lifeline. Donnelly has his reasons, Rachel said, though she didn't believe it herself. Donnelly has his prejudices, Rodriguez corrected. And his reasons usually involve keeping certain types of soldiers visible while making others disappear. The question is, how long are you going to let him? Through the window, Rachel could see the patrol returning from their morning mission. The Humvees rolled through the base entrance covered in dust, their occupants looking tired, but satisfied with whatever they'd accomplished. She watched Sullivan climb out of the lead vehicle, already launching into what appeared to be an animated story for the soldiers gathering around him. I heard something interesting this morning, Rodriguez continued, lowering her voice. Intelligence picked up chatter about a high-value target in our area of operations. Isaiah's commander, named Amir Hassan, apparently trying to establish a new cell in Sector 7. Rachel felt something stir in her chest. High-value targets were exactly the kind of mission she'd trained for during her previous deployments. Her experience with insurgent networks and urban combat tactics could be crucial for an operation like that. And Donnelly's response? Rachel asked, same as always. Assign it to his golden boys and hope for the best. Problem is, Hassan isn't some amateur with an AK-47. This guy's been operating in Syria for 5 years. He knows every trick in the book, and he's not going to be taken down by enthusiasm and machismo. Rodriguez paused, studying Rachel's expression. Of course, sometimes the best person for a job isn't the one who looks the part. Sometimes it's the one who actually knows what they're doing. Rachel set down her pen and looked out at the compound where soldiers were preparing for another patrol. The afternoon heat was building, and she could see the shimmer starting to rise from the asphalt. She'd been patient for 8 months, waiting for someone to recognize her qualifications and give her a chance to prove herself in the field. But patience, she was learning, could become its own kind of prison. The target assessment is current? Rachel asked quietly. Completely current. In fact, the intelligence came in this morning. Hassan's been spotted in a compound about 15 kilometers from here, apparently meeting with local contacts to establish supply lines. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of opportunity she'd been waiting for a chance to use. Her skills against a target that actually mattered. More importantly, it was a chance to prove that the Army's investment in her training hadn't been wasted on someone too fragile for real military work. Rodriguez, Rachel said quietly, what would happen if someone were to volunteer for additional reconnaissance in that area? Just to gather more intelligence, you understand? Rodriguez's smile was slow and knowing. Well, as long as the soldier was qualified and the mission was logged properly, I don't see how anyone could object. Of course, if that soldier happened to encounter the target during routine reconnaissance. She shrugged. These things happen in a war zone. Rachel looked back at her paperwork, then at the window where she could see Donnelly briefing another group of soldiers, then at the administrative office where she'd been spending too many days doing work that wasted her training and experience. A decision crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. I think I need to check the perimeter, she said. Take your time, Rodriguez replied. I'll handle things here. And Blackwood? Your combat gear is in locker 23. Might want to grab it. If you're planning on that perimeter check. Rachel nodded and headed toward the equipment room. For the first time in months, she felt like she was walking toward something instead of away from it. The opportunity was waiting, and so was her chance to remind everyone what they'd forgotten. About the soldier they'd been calling Pretty Princess. As she changed into her tactical gear, Rachel could hear the distant sound of helicopters and the constant radio chatter that was the soundtrack of military life. Donnelly's voice echoed from the compound, confident and dismissive as he assigned missions to soldiers he deemed worthy. He had no idea that his perfect system of exclusion was about to get a lot more complicated. The afternoon sun beat down on forward operating base Iron Ridge, but for the first time in 8 months, Rachel Blackwood wasn't thinking about the heat. She was thinking about a mission that would change everything. Colonel Frank Donnelly stood in the climate-controlled command center, studying satellite imagery on multiple screens while sipping coffee from a mug that read, "World's Greatest Commander," a gift from his wife that he displayed with unironic pride. At 47, Donnelly had built his career on a foundation of playing it safe, following protocols, and surrounding himself with subordinates who never questioned his judgment. His office walls were covered with commendations and photographs of him shaking hands with various military dignitaries, but notably absent were any combat decorations or field leadership awards. The colonel's approach to command was simple: delegate dangerous tasks to expendable personnel while taking credit for successful outcomes. He'd mastered the art of military bureaucracy, understanding that perception often mattered more than performance. In his mind, maintaining order and discipline meant keeping certain types of soldiers in their proper place, and women like Rachel Blackwood definitely had a place, just not in his combat operations. "Sir, the Hassan intel package is ready for review," announced Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, Donnelly's aide-de-camp and one of the few officers on base who seemed to share his commander's views about gender roles in combat. Thompson was young, ambitious, and had learned that agreeing with Donnelly's decisions was the fastest path to career advancement. Donnelly nodded without looking away from the screens. "Good. Schedule a briefing for 1400 hours. I want Sullivan, Martinez, and Davis for this operation. Make sure we have full air support on standby. What about Sergeant Blackwood, sir? Her file shows extensive experience with insurgent tactics and urban warfare. This seems like exactly the type of mission she's trained for." The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. Donnelly finally turned to face Thompson, his expression a mixture of disbelief and condescension. "Lieutenant, I think you may have misunderstood something fundamental about military operations. This isn't a social experiment. We're dealing with a high-value terrorist target who's responsible for killing American soldiers. I need warriors for this mission, not—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Not someone who's going to become a liability when things get violent." Thompson shifted uncomfortably. He'd reviewed Rachel's service record and knew she had more combat experience than most of the soldiers Donnelly routinely sent on dangerous missions. Her psychological evaluations described her as exceptionally stable under pressure, and her marksmanship scores were in the top 5% of all personnel on the base. But Thompson also knew that questioning Donnelly's decisions too forcefully could derail his own career prospects. "Of course, sir. I was just thinking about maximizing our tactical advantages." "Our tactical advantage," Donnelly said firmly, "comes from using soldiers who are built for combat. Blackwood may look good on paper, but when bullets start flying and blood starts spilling, you need people who can handle the psychological pressure. Women simply aren't wired the same way men are for that kind of violence." It was a speech Donnelly had given many times, always with the confidence of someone stating an obvious truth rather than expressing a personal prejudice. In his worldview, military effectiveness was directly correlated with traditional masculine traits: aggression, physical strength, and the ability to compartmentalize emotion. The idea that someone like Rachel could possess these qualities in equal or greater measure than his male soldiers simply didn't fit into his understanding of how the world worked. The command center door opened, and Jake Sullivan entered, still wearing his combat gear from the morning patrol. His face was flushed with the particular excitement that came from having survived another mission in hostile territory, and his swagger suggested he had stories to tell. "Colonel, sir," Sullivan said, snapping a somewhat casual salute. "Just got back from Sector 5. No contact, but we did spot some suspicious activity near the Old Market District." "Good work, Corporal," Donnelly replied, his tone warm with approval. Sullivan was exactly the kind of soldier Donnelly preferred: aggressive, confident, and never burdened by excessive thinking about the consequences of his actions. The fact that Sullivan's tactical decisions sometimes put his team at unnecessary risk was less important than his willingness to take charge and make things happen. "Sir, I heard we might have actionable intelligence on that Hassan character," Sullivan continued. "I'd like to volunteer for whatever operation you're planning. My team knows the area, and we're ready for a real fight." Donnelly smiled. This was the kind of enthusiasm he wanted to see from his soldiers. "I appreciate that attitude, Corporal. You'll definitely be part of the operation. We're briefing at 1400 hours. What about Princess?" Sullivan asked with a grin that suggested he already knew the answer. "I heard she was asking about joining patrols again. Maybe she thinks she can charm Hassan into surrendering." The comment triggered a round of chuckles from the other soldiers in the command center. Donnelly's smile widened, pleased to see his subordinates understood the natural order of things without needing explicit instruction. "Sergeant Blackwood will be handling communications support," Donnelly said. "Someone needs to coordinate with headquarters while the real soldiers are in the field." "Good call, sir," Sullivan replied. "Last thing we need is someone having a panic attack when things get ugly. I've seen what happens when people who aren't cut out for combat get thrown into the mix. They freeze up, make bad decisions, get people killed." Sullivan's assessment was delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who had never actually witnessed Rachel under pressure. His opinion was based entirely on assumptions about gender and combat effectiveness, reinforced by months of pretty princess jokes and dismissive comments from other soldiers who shared his prejudices. What Sullivan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rachel's previous deployments had included situations that would have broken most soldiers. She'd been part of a convoy ambush in Iraq, where she'd helped extract wounded soldiers under heavy fire. She'd participated in house-to-house clearing operations in urban environments where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Her calm demeanor and quiet confidence weren't signs of weakness. They were the hallmarks of someone who had already proven herself in the crucible of combat. Donnelly pulled up Rachel's personnel file on his computer, scanning through the details with the expression of someone looking for confirmation of his existing beliefs rather than objective evaluation of her qualifications. Her training scores were impressive, her psychological evaluations were outstanding, and her previous commanders had consistently rated her performance as exceptional. But Donnelly had become expert at reading between the lines, finding ways to interpret positive information in ways that supported his predetermined conclusions. "Look at this," he said to Thompson and Sullivan, pointing at the screen. 2 deployments, but mostly support roles. When she was involved in combat operations, she was always part of a larger team, never had to make the hard decisions alone. It was a masterful piece of selective interpretation. Rachel's support roles had included convoy security, base defense, and urban patrol operations, assignments that regularly involved combat contact and required exactly the kind of tactical decision-making that Donnelly claimed she lacked. But by framing her service record in terms of what she hadn't done rather than what she had accomplished, Donnelly could maintain his narrative about her unsuitability for combat leadership. "Besides," Donnelly continued, "Hassan isn't going to be impressed by someone who looks like she belongs in a recruiting poster. This is going to require getting down in the dirt, maybe using enhanced interrogation techniques if we capture him alive. That's not work for someone who's worried about breaking fingernails." The comment revealed something important about Donnelly's mindset. In his view, Effective military leadership was inseparable from a particular kind of masculine aggression. The idea that someone could be both physically attractive and tactically deadly simply didn't compute with his understanding of how warriors were supposed to look and behave. Sullivan nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. When I was in Fallujah, I saw what real combat looked like. You need people who can flip that switch, who can go from zero to lethal in a heartbeat. No offense to the ladies, but they're just not built for that kind of work. Like Donnelly, Sullivan was speaking from a position of assumed expertise, rather than actual experience with female soldiers in combat. His deployment to Fallujah had been brief and largely uneventful, but he'd learned to tell stories that made his service sound more dramatic than it actually was. The myth of his combat expertise had grown through repetition, until even he believed his own exaggerated accounts of battlefield heroism. As the afternoon briefing approached, Donnelly felt confident in his decision-making process. He'd selected soldiers based on what he considered proven criteria: physical strength, aggressive instincts, and the kind of masculine confidence that intimidated enemies and inspired subordinates. The fact that Rachel Blackwood possessed superior qualifications in several key areas was irrelevant, because those qualifications didn't fit his template for what a warrior should be. What Donnelly failed to understand was that his systematic exclusion of qualified personnel wasn't making his unit more effective, was creating dangerous blind spots that would eventually compromise mission success. By prioritizing perception over performance, he was building a team that looked impressive, but lacked the tactical depth and strategic thinking that complex operations required. More importantly, his treatment of Rachel was creating exactly the kind of situation that produces unpredictable results. Soldiers who are consistently underutilized and undervalued don't simply disappear. They find ways to prove their worth, sometimes through channels that bypass official command structure entirely. As Donnelly prepared for his afternoon briefing, confident in his ability to manage both the Hassan operation and his personnel issues, he had no idea that the soldier he dismissed as Pretty Princess was already planning to demonstrate just how wrong his assumptions had been. The desert heat outside was building toward its daily peak, but inside the command center, Colonel Frank Donnelly remained comfortable in his climate-controlled environment, insulated from both the weather and the consequences of his decisions. Stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the fundamental flaws in Donnelly's leadership philosophy. But first, he had a briefing to conduct and a mission to plan with soldiers he trusted to handle the real work of war. The afternoon briefing room felt like a tribunal designed to exclude rather than include. Rachel Blackwood stood outside the reinforced glass doors, watching through the windows as Donnelly addressed his chosen soldiers. Sullivan sat at the front, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told he didn't belong. Martinez and Davis flanked him, both young corporals who'd earned their spots on the team through enthusiasm rather than experience. Missing from the room was any soldier who might question Donnelly's tactical approach or suggest alternative strategies. Rachel pressed her ear to the door, catching fragments of the briefing that should have included her expertise. Donnelly's voice carried through the thin walls, authoritative and certain as he described the intelligence picture surrounding ISIS commander Amir Hassan. Hassan's compound is located in Sector 7, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of our position, Donnelly was saying. Intelligence suggests he's meeting with local contacts to establish new supply lines for weapons and explosives. This represents our best opportunity to neutralize a high-value target who's been operating in our area for months. Through the glass, Rachel could see satellite imagery displayed on the main screen. She recognized the terrain immediately: a cluster of buildings surrounded by narrow streets and overlooked by several elevated positions that could serve as sniper nests or observation posts. It was exactly the kind of complex urban environment where her advanced tactical training would be most valuable. "Sir," Martinez raised his hand, What's our rules of engagement if we encounter civilians in the target area? Standard row applies. Donnelly replied dismissively. But remember, anyone in Hassan's vicinity is likely a combatant or sympathizer. Don't let political correctness get you killed out there. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Donnelly's cavalier attitude toward civilian casualties was exactly the kind of thinking that created more enemies than it eliminated. Her experience in urban warfare had taught her that successful operations required surgical precision, not the sledgehammer approach that Donnelly seemed to prefer. What about tactical approach? Sullivan asked. Are we going in loud or trying for stealth? Direct. Assault, Donnelly said firmly. We hit them hard and fast before they can react. Overwhelming force is our best advantage against these terrorists. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the frustration build in her chest like pressure in a steam boiler. Everything about Donnelly's approach was wrong for this type of target. Hassan hadn't survived 5 years in Syria by being vulnerable to frontal assaults. He would have escape routes, early warning systems, and contingency plans that would make a direct attack more likely to result in his escape than his capture. The briefing room door opened and Lieutenant Thompson emerged, nearly colliding with Rachel in the hallway. His expression shifted from surprise to mild embarrassment as he realized she'd been listening to the classified briefing. Sergeant Blackwood, he said awkwardly, can I help you with something? I was hoping to contribute to the mission planning. Rachel replied evenly. My experience with insurgent tactics could be valuable for an operation like this. Thompson glanced back toward the briefing room, where Donnelly's voice continued outlining assault procedures. I appreciate your interest, but the colonel has already selected his team for this operation. Perhaps there's another way you could contribute to the overall mission. It was a polite dismissal, delivered with the kind of diplomatic language that made rejection sound like consideration. Rachel had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times over the past months, each one a small reminder that her qualifications mattered less than her gender in the eyes of her commanders. Lieutenant, Hassan has been operating in Syria for 5 years. He's not going to be taken down by a frontal assault. He'll have multiple escape routes, probably tunnels connecting the buildings, and definitely early warning systems that will give him time to disappear before our people even reach the compound. Thompson's expression suggested he was actually listening, which made him different from most of the officers on the base. That's a good point. Maybe I should mention that to the colonel. You should also mention that urban warfare requires different rules of engagement, Rachel continued, sensing an opening. Civilian casualties in operations like this create more terrorists than we eliminate. The local population needs to see U.S. as liberators, not occupiers. Right, yes, that makes sense. Thompson was nodding now, clearly recognizing the tactical wisdom in Rachel's assessment. Let me talk to Colonel Donnelly. Maybe we can find a way to incorporate your insights into the mission planning. Rachel felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Thompson would be the advocate she needed to break through Donnelly's prejudices and contribute to an operation where her skills could make a real difference. 20 minutes later, Thompson emerged from the briefing room with an expression that told Rachel everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. The colonel appreciates your tactical insights, Thompson said carefully, but he feels that the mission parameters are already well established. He's confident that the selected team has the experience necessary to handle this type of operation. What did he say when you mentioned the escape routes? Thompson shifted uncomfortably. He said that's why we're hitting them with overwhelming force. He doesn't want to give Hassan time to think about escaping. Rachel felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest. Donnelly had dismissed her tactical assessment without even considering its merit. Probably the moment Thompson mentioned it came from her. It was a perfect example of how prejudice could blind commanders to valuable intelligence, potentially compromising mission success and endangering American lives. Lieutenant, Did you mention my experience with similar operations in Iraq? I did. Thompson's voice was getting quieter. The colonel said that support roles in previous deployments don't translate to leadership capability in current operations. There it was, the systematic reinterpretation of her service record that Donnelly used to justify keeping her sidelined. Every accomplishment became a limitation. Every success was reframed as evidence of her unsuitability for more challenging assignments. As Thompson hurried away, clearly uncomfortable with his role as messenger, Rachel found herself alone in the hallway outside the briefing room. Through the glass doors, she could see the chosen soldiers reviewing maps and equipment lists, their faces animated with the excitement of an upcoming mission. They were preparing for an operation that would likely fail because their commander was too prejudiced to accept tactical advice from someone who didn't fit his stereotype of what a warrior should look like. The injustice of the situation crystallized into something harder and more dangerous than simple frustration. Rachel wasn't just being denied an opportunity to serve. She was watching a mission being compromised by the very prejudices that had been used to exclude her. American lives were at risk because Donnelly valued perception over performance, tradition over tactical excellence. Walking toward the administrative building, where she'd been assigned to monitor radio communications during the operation, Rachel passed the base's main communications center. Staff Sergeant Williams was at his desk, monitoring multiple frequencies and updating situation reports that would be forwarded to higher command. "Princess," Williams called out as she passed. "Heard you tried to crash the boys' party again. When are you going to learn that some jobs are just too dangerous for delicate flowers?" The comment was delivered with a grin that suggested Williams thought he was being playful rather than cruel. Like most of the soldiers on the base, he'd internalized the pretty princess narrative to the point where he genuinely believed Rachel's exclusion from combat operations was for her own protection rather than the result of systematic discrimination. "Just trying to contribute where I can, Williams," Rachel replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Hey, I get it," Williams continued, apparently oblivious to the condescension in his tone. "Everyone wants to be part of the action, but there's nothing wrong with support roles. Someone has to handle the paperwork while the real soldiers are out there taking care of business." Rachel paused in the doorway, studying Williams' earnest expression. He genuinely believed he was being supportive, offering her comfort about her assigned role in the military hierarchy. The fact that his support was built on assumptions about her limitations, rather than recognition of her capabilities, made it somehow worse than outright hostility. "Williams," she said quietly, "what would you say if I told you I had more combat experience than half the soldiers going on tonight's mission?" Williams laughed, the sound carrying that particular edge of discomfort that suggested he was beginning to sense this conversation wasn't going where he'd expected. "Come on, Princess. I've seen your file. Support roles, administrative duties, convoy security. That's not the same as real combat." Convoy security in Iraq included 3 ambushes and 2 IED attacks, Rachel said evenly. Administrative duties included coordinating air support for troops in contact. Support roles included extracting wounded soldiers under fire. Each sentence was delivered like a fact being entered into evidence, building a case that Williams clearly wasn't prepared to hear. The laughter died in Williams' throat. For the first time since Rachel had known him, he seemed to be actually considering the possibility that his assumptions about her service record might be incomplete. I didn't know that," he said lamely. "Most people don't," Rachel replied. "They see what they expect to see, hear what they want to hear. Makes it easier to maintain their worldview." As Rachel continued toward her assigned post, she could feel Williams watching her with an expression she'd never seen from him before, something that might have been respect, or at least uncertainty about his previous judgments. It was a small victory, but it reminded her that not everyone on the base was completely closed to the possibility that their pretty princess might be more capable than they'd assumed. The administrative building felt like a tomb after the energy of the briefing room. Rachel settled at her assigned desk, surrounded by radio equipment and communication protocols that would keep her connected to the mission without allowing her to influence its outcome. She would spend the evening listening to radio chatter, filing reports, and watching from the sidelines as soldiers with half her experience attempted an operation that her tactical knowledge could have improved. But as Rachel stared at the radio, equipment that would carry the voices of soldiers heading into danger, she began to realize that her exclusion from official channels didn't necessarily mean exclusion from the mission itself. Communications equipment worked both ways. It could receive orders, but it could also send them. And sometimes, the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure came down to someone being willing to act outside official channels when those channels were compromised by prejudice and poor judgment. The sun was beginning to set over forward operating base Iron Ridge, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. In a few hours, Sullivan, Martinez, and Davis would load into their vehicles and head toward a confrontation with one of the most dangerous terrorists in the region. They would follow Donnelly's plan, use his tactics, and hope that overwhelming force could compensate for strategic short-sightedness. Rachel Blackwood sat at her radio console, officially relegated to support duties, but increasingly certain that support might not be enough to prevent disaster. The mission was flawed, the leadership was compromised, and American lives were at stake. Sometimes she was beginning to understand. The most loyal thing a soldier could do was disobey orders that were guaranteed to get people killed. Master Sergeant Carmen Rodriguez found Rachel in the communication center 2 hours before the scheduled mission departure. The veteran NCO moved through the building with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned her rank through 15 years of competent leadership rather than political maneuvering. Her weathered face bore the kind of scars that came from actual combat experience, and her eyes held the steady gaze of someone who'd learned to see through military bullshit to the truth underneath. "Blackwood," Rodriguez said, settling into a chair next to Rachel's workstation. "You look like someone just told you Christmas was canceled." Rachel glanced up from the mission briefing documents. She'd been reviewing the sanitized version that support personnel were allowed to see, which contained about half the tactical information she'd need to provide effective communications. Coordination. "Just trying to understand how I'm supposed to coordinate support for an operation when I don't have complete intelligence on the target area." Rodriguez studied the papers on Rachel's desk, her expression growing increasingly grim as she recognized what was missing from the official briefing materials. "This is what Donnelly gave you to work with. Standard operating procedure for support personnel," Rachel replied, though her tone suggested she found the procedure anything but standard. "Need to know basis, and apparently I don't need to know much. Bullshit." Rodriguez's response was immediate and emphatic. "You can't coordinate effective communication support without understanding the tactical picture. What if the primary team needs emergency extraction? What if they encounter unexpected resistance and need to call for backup? How are you supposed to make critical decisions with half the information you need?" It was exactly the question Rachel had been asking herself, and hearing it from Rodriguez, one of the most respected NCOs on the base, validated her growing frustration with the entire situation. Rodriguez wasn't known for challenging authority without good reason, which made her criticism of Donnelly's approach particularly significant. "Carmen," Rachel said quietly, using Rodriguez's first name in a way that acknowledged the personal nature of the conversation they were about to have. "Can I ask you something off the record?" Rodriguez nodded, her expression becoming more serious. "Shoot. How long have you been watching Donnelly systematically exclude qualified personnel from combat operations?" The question hung in the air between them like a live grenade. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, her eyes studying Rachel's face as if trying to determine how much truth the younger soldier could handle. "Since he took command 8 months ago," Rodriguez said finally, "you're not the first capable soldier. He's sidelined, and you probably won't be the last. Donnelly's got a very specific idea about what a warrior should look like, and anyone who doesn't fit that template gets pushed into support roles regardless of their actual qualifications. Have you ever said anything to higher command?" Rodriguez's laugh was bitter. "You think I haven't tried? I filed 3 separate reports questioning personnel assignments and tactical decisions. Each one got buried in bureaucratic review processes that never seemed to reach any conclusions. The system protects commanders like Donnelly because they follow proper procedures and file the right paperwork, even when their decisions are putting people at unnecessary risk." Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd assumed that competent leadership existed somewhere up the chain of command, that eventually someone with authority would recognize the problems with Donnelly's approach and make corrections. Learning that Rodriguez had already tried official channels without success meant that change would have to come from somewhere else. "Tell me about Hassan," Rachel said, shifting the conversation toward more immediate concerns. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and called up a detailed intelligence file that was significantly more comprehensive than anything Rachel had been shown. Amir Hassan, 38 years old, former Syrian army officer who defected to ISIS in 2019. He's been operating in this region for 18 months, building a network of local contacts and establishing supply lines for weapons and explosives. The intelligence photos showed a lean, bearded man with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm expression that suggested he was comfortable with violence but not ruled by it. This wasn't a wild-eyed fanatic driven by religious fervor. This was a professional soldier who'd chosen terrorism as a career path. "Donnelly's planning a direct assault," Rachel said. "Hit them hard and fast with overwhelming force." "I know." Rodriguez's tone carried the weight of someone who'd seen too. Many operations fail because commanders chose tactics that felt satisfying rather than strategies that actually worked. Hassan didn't survive 18 months in hostile territory by being vulnerable to frontal attacks. The man's a former army officer. He knows exactly how American forces operate, and he's had plenty of time to prepare for this kind of assault. Rodriguez scrolled through additional intelligence data, showing Rachel aerial reconnaissance photos of Hassan's compound. The images revealed a complex of buildings connected by narrow alleys and surrounded by multiple escape routes. More importantly, the compound was positioned in a way that provided excellent fields of fire for defenders, while limiting approach options for attackers. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, pointing to specific features in the photos. 3 separate buildings with sight lines covering all the main approaches. Underground passages connecting the structures. We confirmed those with ground-penetrating radar last week. Multiple exit points leading to different parts of the city, including at least 2 routes that connect to tunnel systems dating back to Roman times. Rachel studied the images with growing alarm. Donnelly sending 3 soldiers into a kill zone with no tactical advantage and no understanding of the target's capabilities. "Worse than that," Rodriguez continued, "Hassan knows we're coming. Our communication security has been compromised for weeks. We think he's got someone feeding him information from inside the base. So he's not just prepared for an assault. He's specifically prepared for the assault Donnelly is planning." The revelation hit Rachel like a physical blow. If Hassan had advance warning of the operation, then Sullivan, Martinez, and Davis weren't just walking into a tactical disadvantage. They were walking into a trap designed specifically to kill American soldiers. "Carmen, you have to tell Donnelly. The mission needs to be scrubbed or completely replanned with this intelligence." Rodriguez's expression was grim. "I tried. Brought the intelligence compromise directly to his attention 3 days ago. He dismissed it as unconfirmed rumors and told me not to let paranoia interfere with operational planning. He knows the mission is compromised and he's sending them anyway. Donnelly's convinced that American superiority in training and equipment will overcome any tactical disadvantages. He believes that 3 motivated soldiers with modern weapons can handle anything Hassan throws at them. Rodriguez paused, her voice becoming quieter. He's wrong, and those boys are going to die because of his arrogance. Rachel stared at the intelligence photos, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. The compound's defensive advantages were significant, but they weren't insurmountable if you approached a problem with patience, surgical precision, and an understanding of the enemy's psychology. Hassan was a professional soldier, which meant he would have contingency plans and escape routes, but it also meant he would think like a soldier rather than a fanatic. "What would you do?" Rachel asked. "If you were planning this operation, how would you take Hassan?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, studying the reconnaissance photos with the expression of someone working through a complex tactical problem. Single operator, nighttime approach, bypass the main compound entirely. Hassan's got to sleep somewhere, and professional soldiers like routine. Find his patterns, identify his vulnerabilities, take him when he's isolated from his support structure. Assassination, rather than capture. Sometimes elimination is the only realistic option, Rodriguez said bluntly. Hassan's too valuable to his organization and too dangerous to leave operational. A capture mission requires overwhelming force and inevitably results in civilian casualties. Sometimes the cleanest solution is the most direct one. Rachel nodded, understanding the brutal calculus of counter-terrorism operations. Hassan wasn't going to surrender, and any attempt to take him alive would put American soldiers at unnecessary risk while giving him opportunities to escape or cause collateral damage that would turn local populations against coalition forces. "Carmen," Rachel said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, if someone with the right training and experience were to attempt a solo operation against Hassan, what kind of support would they need?" Rodriguez turned to look at Rachel directly, her expression shifting from tactical discussion to personal concern. "Rachel, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that 3 good soldiers are about to die because their commander is too prejudiced and stubborn to listen to tactical advice from someone who doesn't fit his stereotype of what a warrior should look like. And you're thinking about doing something about it." It wasn't a question. Rodriguez had seen the look in Rachel's eyes before, in other soldiers who'd reached the point where official channels had failed and direct action became the only viable option. "I'm thinking about preventing a catastrophe," Rachel said quietly. "Hassan's compound has vulnerabilities that Donnelly's assault plan can't exploit. But a single operator with the right approach could neutralize the target without alerting his security network." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of what Rachel was suggesting. As a senior NCO, she had responsibilities to maintain discipline and follow command structure. But she also had responsibilities to protect soldiers under her indirect supervision, and Donnelly's mission plan was almost certainly going to get people killed. "If someone were to attempt something like that," Rodriguez said carefully, "they'd need current intelligence on Hassan's personal security arrangements, detailed maps of the compound's underground passages, and real-time surveillance data to track his movements. And if someone had access to all that information..." Rodriguez reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a small data storage device. "They'd probably find everything they needed on a device like this. Of course, possession of classified intelligence without proper authorization is a serious offense under military law." Rachel took the device, feeling its weight in her palm. It was small, innocuous, and contained information that could either save American lives or destroy her military career, possibly both. "Carmen, why are you doing this?" "Because 15 years ago, I was in your position. Different base, different commander, same bullshit prejudices keeping qualified soldiers from doing their jobs. I didn't have the courage to act, and good people Died because I followed orders instead of following my conscience. Rodriguez stood, her expression resolute. I won't make that mistake twice. As Rodriguez walked toward the door, she paused and looked back at Rachel. If someone were to take unauthorized action based on that intelligence, they'd probably want to wait until the official mission was underway. Create confusion about who was responsible for what outcome. And if that someone succeeded, then Hassan would be eliminated, American lives would be saved, and maybe someone like Donnelly would learn that competence matters more than conformity. Rodriguez's smile was grim but determined. Of course, if that someone failed, they'd probably face court-martial and the end of their military career. After Rodriguez left, Rachel sat alone in the communication center, staring at the data device in her hand. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed to build her military career, was balanced against the lives of 3 soldiers who were about to walk into a trap because their commander was too prejudiced to accept tactical advice from a woman. The choice, when it came down to it, wasn't really a choice at all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sun had disappeared behind the western mountains, leaving forward operating base Iron Ridge bathed in the harsh glare of sodium lights that turned everything the color of old brass. Rachel Blackwood sat in her quarters, the classified data device from Rodriguez weighing heavy in her hands as she scrolled through intelligence that painted a picture of imminent disaster. Hassan's compound wasn't just well defended, it was a masterpiece of defensive architecture designed by someone who understood exactly how American forces operated. The underground tunnel system connected not just the 3 main buildings, but extended outward to create a network of escape routes that could deposit fleeing terrorists anywhere within a 2-mile radius of the target area. Motion sensors covered every conventional approach route, and thermal imaging revealed guard positions that would give defenders overlapping fields of fire against any assault force. More disturbing was the communications intelligence Rodriguez had gathered. Intercepted radio transmissions confirmed that Hassan knew about tonight's operation in detail: the timing, the number of personnel, even the planned approach routes. Donnelly's mission wasn't just tactically flawed. It was walking directly into a prepared ambush. Rachel's door opened without a knock, and Jake Sullivan entered wearing his full combat gear. His face was painted with camouflage that made his grin look even more predatory than usual, and his tactical vest was loaded with enough ammunition to fight a small war. The sight of him dressed for combat while she sat in standard fatigues felt like salt in an open wound. "Hey, Princess," Sullivan said, settling uninvited into the chair across from her desk. "Thought I'd stop by before we head out to say goodbye. You know, in case something happens out there and I don't get another chance to see that pretty face of yours." Rachel looked up from the intelligence reports, studying Sullivan's expression. Despite his casual tone, she could see the tension around his eyes that suggested he wasn't as confident about the mission as he wanted to appear. Good soldiers developed instincts about danger, and something in Sullivan's demeanor suggested his instincts were warning him about tonight's operation. "Jake," she said quietly, "have you looked at the tactical situation you're walking into?" Sullivan's grin faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "Hassan's compound. The defensive positions, the escape routes, the fact that your communications have been compromised for weeks." Rachel turned her laptop screen toward Sullivan, showing him the reconnaissance photos that revealed the true complexity of the target. "This isn't a simple snatch-and-grab operation. This is a trap." Sullivan studied the images for a moment, his expression shifting from casual confidence to something approaching concern. For the first time since Rachel had known him, he seemed to be actually considering the possibility that his assumptions about the mission might be incomplete. "Donnelly briefed us on the defensive positions," Sullivan said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. He said overwhelming force would neutralize any tactical advantages Hassan might have. Jake, look at these guard positions. Rachel pointed to specific locations in the photos. Overlapping fields of fire covering every approach route. If you go in with a direct assault, you'll be walking into a kill zone with no cover and no tactical advantage. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, studying the intelligence data with the expression of someone realizing that his confidence might have been misplaced. So what would you do? If you were planning this operation, how would you handle Hassan? It was the first time Sullivan had ever asked for her tactical opinion, and Rachel found herself looking at him with something approaching respect. Fear, apparently, could penetrate prejudice in ways that reason never could. Single operator. Nighttime infiltration. Bypass the main compound entirely, Rachel said, echoing Rodriguez's assessment. Hassan's a professional soldier. He'll have personal security protocols and escape procedures. But professionals also have routines, and routines create vulnerabilities. You're talking about assassination. I'm talking about surgical removal of a high-value target with minimal risk to American personnel and zero collateral damage. Rachel pulled up additional intelligence showing Hassan's personal habits and security arrangements. He meets with his lieutenants every evening at 2,200 hours, in a small building about 200 meters from the main compound. Minimal security, single guard, predictable timing. Sullivan leaned forward, his casual demeanor completely gone now. You've really thought this through. I've thought about how to keep American soldiers alive while accomplishing the mission. Objective. That's what tactical planning is supposed to be about. Why are you telling me this? Sullivan asked. I mean, we haven't exactly been friendly to each other. Rachel looked at Sullivan, really looked at him, and saw past the arrogant facade to the young soldier underneath, who was scared about walking into a situation he didn't fully understand. Despite months of pretty princess jokes and dismissive comments, she couldn't bring herself to let him walk into a trap without warning him about what he was facing. Because you're an American soldier, and American soldiers don't deserve to die because their commander is too stubborn to listen to tactical advice. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with implications that extended far beyond tonight's mission. Rachel, he said, using her first name for what might have been the first time ever, what if you're right? What if this whole operation is fucked from the start? Then you need to be very careful out there. Watch for ambush indicators, maintain escape routes, and don't let Donnelly's confidence override your own survival instincts. Or, Rachel met his eyes directly, or someone with the right training and experience needs to handle Hassan before you walk into that kill zone. The implication hung between them like a live wire. Sullivan stared at Rachel with an expression she'd never seen from him before, something that might have been respect mixed with dawning realization. Jesus Christ, Sullivan said quietly. You're thinking about going after him yourself. I'm thinking about preventing a disaster. Rachel, if you get caught operating outside command authority, they'll throw you in Leavenworth and lose the key. This isn't just about disobeying orders. This is about conducting unauthorized military operations in a hostile combat zone. And if I don't act, 3 good soldiers are going to die tonight because their commander is too prejudiced to accept tactical input from someone who doesn't fit his stereotype of what a warrior should look like. Sullivan stood and began pacing the small room, his combat gear clanking with each step. This is insane. You can't just go rogue and conduct your own personal war against ISIS. It's not personal, and it's not rogue, Rachel replied firmly. It's tactical. Hassan is a legitimate military target, and I'm a qualified soldier with the training and experience necessary to eliminate him. The only thing preventing official authorization is Donnelly's prejudice against female soldiers in combat roles. But if you're wrong? If something goes wrong and you get killed out there? Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering the question that went to the heart of everything. she'd been wrestling with since Rodriguez left the classified intelligence on her desk. "Jake, how many operations have you been on where you knew going in that the tactical plan was fundamentally flawed?" "None," Sullivan admitted. "How many times have you followed orders that you knew were going to get people killed?" "Never." "Then, you don't understand the position I'm in. I have information that could save American lives, and I have the skills necessary to act on that information. The only thing stopping me is a chain of command that values conformity over competence." Sullivan stopped pacing and looked at Rachel with an expression of dawning comprehension. "You're not just talking about Hassan, are you? This is about everything, all the missions you've been excluded from, all the times your tactical advice has been dismissed, all the months of being treated like you don't belong here. This is about serving my country and protecting my fellow soldiers," Rachel said quietly. "Everything else is just noise." Sullivan studied her face for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You really think you can take Hassan alone? I know I can. The question is whether I'm willing to sacrifice my career to save yours." The words hit Sullivan like a physical blow. For the first time, he seemed to understand that Rachel's exclusion from combat operations wasn't protecting him, it was potentially getting him killed. His confidence in Donnelly's leadership cracked visibly as he grappled with the possibility that the soldier he'd been dismissing as Pretty Princess might be the only person capable of preventing tonight's mission from becoming a catastrophe. "Rachel," Sullivan said finally, "what do you need me to do?" The question transformed everything. Sullivan wasn't just acknowledging her tactical expertise, he was offering to help her act on it, despite the risks to his own career and safety. "Need you to give me 30 minutes before you report to the motor pool. Delay the mission departure by whatever means necessary: equipment malfunction, communications problems, anything that buys me time to reach Hassan's location before your team moves into the kill zone. And if Donnelly asks questions, tell him you're following the advice of the most experienced urban warfare specialist on this base." Rachel stood, her decision made. Tell him that sometimes the best soldier for a job isn't the one who looks the part. It's the one who can get the job done. Sullivan nodded slowly, understanding that he was agreeing to be part of something that would either save American lives or destroy both their careers. 30 minutes, he said. "But Rachel, be careful out there. Hassan didn't survive this long by being careless, and neither should you." After Sullivan left, Rachel sat alone in her quarters, staring at the tactical gear she hadn't worn in 8 months. Outside, she could hear the sounds of soldiers preparing for a mission that would likely get them killed. In 30 minutes, she would either be preparing to save their lives or committing the most consequential act of insubordination in her military career. The choice, she realized, had never really been a choice at all. Some things mattered more than following orders, and keeping American soldiers alive was definitely one of them. Rachel Blackwood moved through her preparation ritual with the methodical precision of someone who understood that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. Her tactical gear felt foreign after months of administrative duty, but her muscle memory kicked in as she checked each piece of equipment with practiced efficiency. Body armor, communications headset, night vision goggles, sidearm, tactical knife, and a suppressed M4 carbine that she'd maintained in perfect condition, despite having no official authorization to carry it. The face looking back at her from the mirror was transformed. Gone was any trace of the pretty princess that her colleagues saw in the dining facility and administrative offices. The woman staring back was a predator, calm, focused, and absolutely lethal. This was who Rachel had always been beneath the surface, the soldier that Donnelly's prejudices had kept locked away from operational duties. Her radio crackled with Sullivan's voice, transmitted on a frequency that wouldn't be monitored by command. "Personnel. Princess, we've got a problem. Donnelly's pushing up the departure time. Says he wants to hit Hassan before the target has time to settle in for the evening." Rachel felt her stomach tighten. An earlier departure would compress her timeline and make it more difficult to reach Hassan's location before the official mission walked into the ambush. How long do I have? 20 minutes, maybe less. Martinez is reporting some kind of equipment malfunction with his primary weapon, but Donnelly's telling him to use a backup. The old man is really eager to get this show on the road. Copy. I'm moving to position now. Rachel slung her rifle and headed for the door, pausing for one last look at her quarters. Everything she'd built over 6 years of military service was balanced on the edge of the next few hours. Success would vindicate her tactical judgment and potentially save American lives. Failure would result in court-martial, imprisonment, and the destruction of everything she'd worked to achieve. The base at night was a different creature than during the day. Harsh security lights created pools of visibility separated by deep shadows that could conceal 100 different kinds of movement. Rachel moved through the darkness with the fluid grace of someone who understood how to use terrain and concealment to remain invisible. Her route to the perimeter took her past the motor pool where Donnelly's official mission was making final preparations. Through the chain-link fence, she could see Sullivan, Martinez, and Davis loading equipment into their vehicles while Donnelly supervised with the aggressive impatience of someone eager to prove his tactical superiority. The three soldiers looked small and vulnerable next to their armored Humvees, like children playing dress-up in adult costumes. In less than an hour, they would be driving toward a kill zone that would test every assumption they'd ever made about their own competence and survival. All personnel, final equipment check. Donnelly's voice carried across the motor pool with military authority. We move out in 15 minutes. Remember, this is a high-value target elimination. Speed and violence of action will be our primary advantages. Rachel felt a bitter smile cross her lips. Speed and violence of action were exactly the wrong tactics for dealing with Hassan, but Donnelly's entire worldview was built on the assumption that American aggression could overcome any tactical disadvantage. He was about to learn that professional terrorists didn't share his respect for conventional military superiority. The base perimeter was guarded by a combination of electronic sensors and roving patrols that followed predictable patterns. Rachel had studied these security measures during her months of administrative duty, partly from boredom and partly from the professional interest of someone who understood that knowledge of defensive systems might someday be useful. Tonight, that knowledge was the difference between successful infiltration and immediate capture. She timed her movement to coincide with a gap between patrol rotations, slipping through a section of perimeter fence that she'd identified weeks earlier as the optimal exit point for unauthorized departures. The desert beyond the base was a landscape of rock formations and scrub vegetation that provided excellent concealment for someone who understood how to use natural terrain features. Rachel's radio buzzed with an encrypted message from Rodriguez. Overwatch established. You have eyes on your route to target. Hassan confirmed in secondary building. Minimal security. Window of opportunity estimated at 45 minutes. The message confirmed what Rachel had hoped. Rodriguez was providing surveillance support from somewhere on the base, using her access to intelligence systems to track both Hassan's movements and the progress of Donnelly's official mission. It was another career-ending violation of military protocol, but it was also the kind of professional support that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophe. Moving through the desert at night required a different set of skills than most soldiers ever developed. The landscape was deceptively treacherous, full of loose rock that could create noise, hidden obstacles that could cause injury, and sightlines that could expose an infiltrator to observation from unexpected directions. Rachel navigated these hazards with the confidence of someone who'd spent countless hours training in similar terrain, using natural features to mask her movement while maintaining steady progress toward the target area. Her night vision equipment revealed a world painted in shades of green and gray, where every shadow could conceal either safety or danger. The Hassan compound appeared as a cluster of heat signatures surrounded by the geometric patterns of man-made defensive positions. Even from a distance, Rachel could see that the intelligence reports had understated the sophistication of Hassan's security arrangements. "Overwatch to Ghost," Rodriguez's voice whispered through Rachel's earpiece, using the call sign they'd agreed upon for tonight's operation. Official mission departed base 5 minutes early. Estimated arrival at primary. Target in 35 minutes. Rachel felt the timeline compressing around her like a closing fist. 35 minutes to reach Hassan's location, eliminate the target, and extract before Sullivan's team walked into the prepared ambush. It was tight, but achievable if everything went according to plan. The problem with military operations was that nothing ever went according to plan. Hassan's secondary building was located exactly where the intelligence reports had indicated, a small, nondescript structure about 200 meters from the main compound, connected to the larger defensive network by a single communications cable and protected by minimal security. Through her scope, Rachel could see the lone guard smoking a cigarette outside the main entrance. His attention focused inward toward the compound rather than outward toward potential threats. "Ghost to Overwatch," Rachel whispered into her radio. "I have eyes on target building. Confirm Hassan's presence inside." "Confirmed." Thermal imaging shows 3 heat signatures in the main room, consistent with Hassan plus 2 associates. Guard. Rotation scheduled in 20 minutes. Rachel studied the building's architecture, looking for entry points that would allow her to reach Hassan without alerting the security network. The structure was typical Middle Eastern construction: thick walls, small windows, flat roof that could be accessed from the rear where natural rock formations provided concealment almost to the building's foundation. Her approach would require crossing about 50 meters of open ground where any mistake could result in immediate detection and overwhelming response from Hassan's security forces. But the alternative was watching 3 American soldiers drive into a kill zone that would almost certainly result in their deaths. Rachel checked her equipment one final time, ensuring that every piece of gear was secured and ready for immediate use. Her suppressed rifle was loaded with subsonic ammunition that would minimize noise signature. Her tactical knife was positioned for quick access in case close combat became necessary. Her communications equipment was configured to maintain contact with Rodriguez while avoiding detection by Hassan's electronic surveillance. Overwatch, Ghost is beginning final approach. Confirm status of official mission. Official mission is Vasihissa. 15 minutes from primary target. Clock is ticking, Ghost. Rachel took a deep breath and began moving toward Hassan's building, using natural terrain features to mask her approach. Every step brought her closer to a confrontation that would either validate everything she'd trained for or result in her death in a Syrian desert, far from anyone who would understand why she'd chosen to risk everything for soldiers who'd spent months treating her like an unwelcome guest at their war. The guard finished his cigarette and flicked the butt into the darkness, missing Rachel's position by less than 10 feet. Through her night vision, she could see his face clearly: young, bored, probably thinking about home rather than watching for threats that his commanders had assured him would never materialize this far from the main compound. Rachel settled into position behind a boulder that provided both concealment and a clear field of fire. Inside the building, Hassan was conducting business with his associates, completely unaware that an American soldier was preparing to demonstrate just how wrong his assumptions about feminine weakness had been. The next few minutes would determine whether Rachel Blackwood was remembered as a hero who saved American lives or as a rogue soldier who died pursuing a personal vendetta against systemic discrimination. Either way, the pretty princess that her colleagues knew was about to disappear forever, replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more competent. Time to remind everyone What they'd forgotten about the soldier they'd been underestimating. The desert night was alive with sounds that most people never noticed. The whisper of wind through rock formations, the distant call of nocturnal hunters, the subtle settling of stone that had been baking in the sun all day. Rachel Blackwood moved through this acoustic landscape like a ghost, each footstep placed with the precision of someone who understood that survival depended on becoming part of the environment rather than fighting against it. Her approach to Hassan's building required crossing a natural amphitheater of stone that provided excellent concealment, but also created acoustic challenges. Every loose pebble could create noise that would alert the guard. Every misstep could send her tumbling into visible terrain where Hassan's security network would spot her immediately. Rachel navigated these hazards with the fluid confidence of someone who'd spent years training in similar conditions, using the desert's own sounds to mask her movement. Through her earpiece, Rodriguez's voice provided a steady stream of intelligence updates. Ghost, official mission is 10 minutes. From primary target. Hassan's meeting is scheduled to conclude in 8 minutes, after which he'll return to the main compound where your window of opportunity disappears. The timeline was compressing faster than Rachel had anticipated. Hassan's business meeting was running shorter than intelligence had predicted, and Donnelly's eagerness to begin his assault was pushing the official mission ahead of schedule. If Rachel didn't reach Hassan in the next few minutes, 3 American soldiers would drive directly into a prepared kill zone, while their primary target escaped through tunnels that connected to safe houses throughout the city. The guard outside. Hassan's building was young, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of casual alertness that suggested he'd been doing this job long enough to become comfortable, but not long enough to become truly professional. He carried an AK-47 with practiced familiarity, but his attention was focused on the main compound rather than the surrounding terrain. In his mind, threats would come from the direction of the American base, not from the rocky wilderness behind his position. Rachel settled into a firing position behind a boulder that provided both cover and concealment, while giving her a clear sight line to both the guard and the building's main entrance. Her suppressed rifle was loaded with subsonic ammunition that would eliminate the acoustic signature of her shots, making it possible to engage multiple targets without alerting Hassan's broader security network. "Ghost to Overwatch," she whispered into her radio. "I have clear shots on the exterior guard and the building entrance. Confirm Hassan's exact position inside." Thermal imaging shows Hassan in the main room, approximately 15 feet from the front door. 2 associates with him, both armed. Guard rotation is due in 4 minutes. Rachel studied the building's architecture through her night vision scope, looking for entry points that would allow her to reach Hassan without giving him time to escape or call for reinforcement. The structure was typical of defensive positions. In this region, thick walls that would stop small arms fire, minimal windows that restricted both visibility and access, and a roof design that funneled potential attackers into predetermined kill zones. But Rachel wasn't planning a frontal assault. Her approach would exploit the building's defensive advantages by turning them into liabilities, using Hassan's own security measures to trap him inside a space where his professional training would become irrelevant. The guard finished checking his watch and began walking a patrol circuit that would take him around the building's perimeter. Rachel tracked his movement through her scope, noting his pace, his attention patterns, and the brief moments when his route would place him out of sight from both the building's interior and the main compound's observation posts. Overwatch. I'm beginning the approach. Maintain surveillance on official mission and advise if timeline changes. Copy, Ghost. Clock is ticking. You have approximately 6 minutes before Hassan returns to main compound. Rachel began moving toward the building, using the guard's patrol route to time her advance. When he disappeared around the building's eastern corner, she sprinted across 15 meters of open ground to reach a position behind a low stone wall that provided concealment less than 20 feet from the front entrance. When he reappeared, on the building's western side, she was invisible in the shadows, close enough to hear his breathing and the soft sound of his boots on sandy ground. The guard completed his circuit and returned to his original position outside the front door, apparently satisfied that the perimeter remained secure. Through the building's single window, Rachel could see the silhouettes of Hassan and his associates, their conversation animated by the kind of gestures that suggested they were discussing operational plans rather than casual business. Rachel drew her tactical knife and began moving toward the guard's position. Close quarters elimination required different skills than long-range shooting patience, precise timing, and the ability to kill silently without giving the target time to raise an alarm. It was work that most soldiers found psychologically difficult, requiring them to overcome natural inhibitions about personal violence in ways that long-distance combat did not. Rachel had no such inhibitions. Her previous deployments had taught her that killing was sometimes necessary to prevent greater violence, and her months of systematic exclusion from combat operations had stripped away any romantic notions about the moral complexity of warfare. Hassan was a legitimate military target who had killed American soldiers, and his elimination would save American lives. Everything else was philosophical luxury that she couldn't afford. The guard never heard her coming. Rachel's approach was timed to coincide with a gust of wind that masked any sound her movement might have created, and her strike was delivered with the clinical precision of someone who understood human anatomy and the most efficient methods for ending life quickly and quietly. The guard collapsed without a sound, his weapon secured before his body hit the ground. Through the window, Rachel could see Hassan and his associates continuing their conversation, completely unaware that their security perimeter had been compromised. Hassan himself was smaller than she'd expected from his intelligence photos, perhaps 5'8" and lean, but carrying himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to command. His face bore the kind of scars that suggested he'd survived situations where lesser men had died, and his eyes held the steady gaze of someone who understood violence as a professional tool rather than an emotional release. Rachel checked her watch. The official mission was now 6 minutes from the primary target, and Hassan's meeting was scheduled to conclude in less than 3 minutes. Her window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and any hesitation could result in either her own death or the deaths of the American soldiers driving toward the main compound. She moved to the building's front door and tested the handle carefully. Locked, but not reinforced in a way that would resist tactical entry techniques. Through the thin wooden door, she could hear Hassan's voice speaking in Arabic, discussing what sounded like supply routes and weapons transfers with his associates. Rachel drew her sidearm and prepared for close-quarters combat in an enclosed space, where split-second reactions would determine who lived and who died. Her heart rate had settled into the steady rhythm that came with extreme focus, and her breathing was controlled in the way that allowed for precise shooting under stress. This was the moment she'd been training for throughout her military career. Convergence of skill, opportunity, and necessity that separated professional soldiers from everyone else. "Ghost to Overwatch," she whispered into her radio. "I'm at the door, beginning interior clearing in 30 seconds. Copy, Ghost. Official mission is 5 minutes from primary target." The advised thermal imaging shows movement in the main compound. Hassan's security forces may be preparing for the expected assault. Rachel smiled grimly. Hassan's preparation for Donnelly's frontal assault would work to her advantage, drawing attention and resources away from his personal security arrangements. While his fighters prepared defensive positions designed to repel a conventional attack, she would eliminate their commander using tactics that bypassed their entire defensive strategy. She placed her hand on the door handle and took a deep breath. Everything that happened in the next few minutes would either vindicate her decision to act outside official channels or confirm Donnelly's assessment that she lacked the judgment necessary for combat operations. Either way, the pretty princess that her colleagues knew was about to demonstrate capabilities that none of them had imagined. Time to show Hassan what American soldiers were really capable of when they stopped asking for permission to do their jobs. Rachel turned the handle and stepped into the darkness, her weapon ready and her mind focused on the kind of violence that would either save American lives or end her own. The room beyond the door was small, dimly lit, and occupied by 3 men who were about to learn that their assumptions about American weakness had been catastrophically wrong. The real war was about to begin. The interior of Hassan's building was spartanly furnished, a single room with rough stone walls, minimal lighting from kerosene lamps, and the kind of austere functionality that spoke to its occupant's military background. Hassan sat behind a low wooden table covered with maps and communication equipment, his 2 associates flanking him in positions that provided security but also limited their mobility in the confined space. Rachel's entry was explosive and precise. Her suppressed rifle eliminated the first associate before any of the 3 men fully registered her presence, the subsonic round taking him center mass and dropping him silently to the floor. The second associate managed to reach for his weapon before Rachel's second shot put him down permanently, his AK-47 clattering uselessly against the stone wall. Hassan himself moved with the fluid speed of someone whose survival had depended on quick reactions for longer than most soldiers had been alive. Instead of reaching for a weapon, he rolled sideways behind the table and came up in a combat crouch, his eyes already assessing Rachel's position, equipment, and likely capabilities. This wasn't a man who panicked under pressure. This was a professional who understood that survival in close-quarters combat required thinking faster than your opponent could shoot. "American," Hassan said in accented English, his voice calm despite the fact that 2 of his men lay dead at his feet. "You are not what I expected." Rachel kept her rifle trained on Hassan's position while scanning the room for additional threats, escape routes, or weapons that could complicate the situation. Her tactical training had taught her that assumptions about enemy capabilities were the fastest way to end up dead, and Hassan's composure suggested he had more resources available than simple small arms. "ISIS Commander Amir Hassan," Rachel replied, her voice steady and professional. "You're under arrest for terrorist activities against coalition forces." Hassan's laugh was genuine, carrying the kind of dark humor that came from someone who'd found himself in impossible situations before and lived to tell about it. "Arrest? Miss, I think you may have misunderstood the tactical situation. You are one person, in my building, surrounded by my people, with no backup and no extraction plan." As if to emphasize his point, Rachel could hear movement outside the building, footsteps, voices, the sound of weapons being readied. Hassan's security forces had apparently noticed that their guard was missing and were moving to investigate. Her window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and Hassan knew it. "Your backup is preparing defensive positions for an assault that will never come," Rachel said. "In 4 minutes, 3 American soldiers will drive into the kill zone you've prepared for them. Unless you're eliminated first." Hassan's expression shifted slightly, suggesting he was reassessing both Rachel's intelligence capabilities and her tactical objectives. "You are not here for arrest," he said with dawning understanding. "You are here for execution. I'm here to prevent American casualties." Hassan nodded slowly, apparently impressed by Rachel's directness. "A soldier's mission. I can respect that. Even from an enemy." He paused, studying her face in the dim lamplight. "But I think you have made an error in calculation. My men will be through that door in less than 2 minutes, and this room provides no cover for extended firefights." Rachel could hear the truth in his assessment. The approaching footsteps were getting closer, and voices outside were coordinating what sounded like a tactical entry. Her original plan had assumed she could eliminate Hassan quietly and extract before his security forces realized what had happened. That plan was now completely compromised. "Then we finish this quickly," Rachel said, setting down her rifle and drawing her tactical knife. Hassan's eyes widened slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise she'd seen from him. "You wish to fight hand to hand?" "Miss, I have been killing people with my bare hands since before you were born. We'll see." The space between them disappeared in a blur of movement. Hassan launched himself across the room with the kind of explosive speed that came from decades of close-quarters combat experience, his hands reaching for Rachel's throat with lethal intent. But Rachel had spent her months of administrative exile maintaining her hand-to-hand combat skills, and Hassan's attack met not weakness but professionally trained violence. Rachel sidestepped Hassan's initial charge and drove her knee toward his solar plexus, but Hassan twisted away and caught her leg, using her own momentum to send her crashing into the stone wall. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent her knife spinning across the floor. But Rachel rolled away from Hassan's follow-up strike and came up in a defensive crouch. Hassan pressed his advantage, driving forward with a combination of strikes that would have incapacitated most opponents. His technique was brutal and efficient, the kind of fighting style developed in Syrian prisons and perfected through years of personal survival in an environment where weakness meant death. But Rachel had learned her combat skills in American military training facilities where instructors understood that female soldiers couldn't rely on superior strength and had to be twice as fast and 3 times as smart as their male counterparts. Rachel absorbed Hassan's assault while looking for the opening that her training had taught her would inevitably come. Hassan was strong, experienced, and ruthless, but he was also operating from assumptions about female combat capabilities that were about to prove catastrophically wrong. The opening came when Hassan overcommitted to a strike aimed at Rachel's head. She ducked under his arm and drove her shoulder into his midsection, using his own momentum to drive him backward into the wooden table. Maps and communication equipment scattered across the floor as both fighters rolled across the surface, each seeking the dominant position that would allow them to end the fight. Hassan managed to get his hands around Rachel's throat, his grip tightening with the methodical pressure of someone who understood exactly how much force was required to crush a human windpipe. "American women," he gasped, his face inches from hers, "always think they are stronger than they are." Rachel's vision began to narrow as Hassan's grip cut off her air supply, but her training kicked in with the kind of automatic response that came from thousands of hours of practice. Instead of trying to break Hassan's grip directly, she drove her thumbs into the pressure points below his ears, using leverage and precision to attack his nervous system rather than matching his superior strength. Hassan's grip loosened involuntarily as pain shot through his nervous system, and Rachel twisted free of his hold while simultaneously wrapping her own arms around his neck. But instead of a simple chokehold, Rachel applied the kind of stranglehold that her military combatives instructors had taught her, a technique that combined pressure on the carotid arteries with restriction of the airway, designed to render an opponent unconscious in seconds rather than minutes. Hassan struggled against Rachel's hold with desperate strength, his combat experience telling him exactly what was happening and how little time he had to break free. He drove his elbow backward into Rachel's ribs, rolled sideways to try to dislodge her grip, and clawed at her arms with fingernails that left bloody scratches on her skin. But Rachel's position was mechanically superior, and her technique was flawless. "This is for every American soldier you've killed," Rachel whispered in Hassan's ear as his struggles began to weaken. "And this is for every colleague who thought I wasn't strong enough to be here." Hassan's movements became uncoordinated as oxygen deprivation began affecting his motor control. His hands fell away from Rachel's arms, and his body weight began to sag against her grip. But Rachel didn't release the hold. She maintained pressure with the clinical determination of someone who understood that half measures in combat got people killed. Hassan's body went limp in her arms, but Rachel continued applying pressure. For another 30 seconds, ensuring that the man who had killed American soldiers and planned to kill more would never have another opportunity to threaten coalition forces. When she finally released her grip, Hassan's body slumped to the floor, his neck bearing the marks of fingers that had proven considerably stronger than he'd anticipated. Outside, the voices were getting closer, and Rachel could hear the distinctive sound of weapons being chambered. Hassan's security forces would be through the door in less than a minute, and her extraction route was compromised. But the primary objective was complete. ISIS commander Amir Hassan was dead, eliminated by the American soldier he'd underestimated as weakness disguised in uniform. Rachel retrieved her rifle and moved toward the building's rear wall, where intelligence reports had indicated the presence of a window that could serve as an emergency exit. As she prepared to extract from a situation that was about to become extremely violent, she keyed her radio one final time. Overwatch Ghost. Primary target is eliminated. Beginning emergency extraction. Copy Ghost. Outstanding work. Official. Mission is 2 minutes from primary target, but they're about to find a very different tactical situation than they expected. Rachel smiled grimly as she prepared to disappear into the desert night. Hassan's security forces would find their commander dead and their carefully prepared ambush compromised, leaving them vulnerable to exactly the kind of frontal assault that Donnelly preferred. The mission that should have gotten 3 American soldiers killed was about to become a complete success, and the pretty princess they'd all underestimated had just demonstrated capabilities that none of them could have imagined. Sometimes, Rachel reflected as she slipped through the window and began her extraction, the most feminine thing a woman could do was remind everyone that femininity and lethality weren't mutually exclusive. Hassan had learned that lesson too late to benefit from it, but perhaps others would prove more educable. The desert welcomed her back into its embrace, and Rachel Blackwood disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a dead terrorist and the scattered assumptions of everyone who'd thought they knew what she was capable of. Rachel's extraction through the Syrian desert was a masterclass in tactical movement under pressure. Behind her, Hassan's compound erupted into chaos as his security forces discovered their commander's body and realized their carefully prepared ambush had been compromised. Shouts in Arabic echoed through the night air, punctuated by the sound of weapons being readied and vehicles starting up as Hassan's fighters scrambled to respond to a threat they didn't understand. Through her earpiece, Rodriguez's voice provided a steady stream of updates that painted a picture of rapidly shifting tactical dynamics. Ghost, Hassan's security forces are in complete disarray. They're abandoning defensive positions and falling back to secondary locations. The primary compound is essentially undefended. Rachel paused behind a boulder formation to catch her breath and assess her situation. Her hands still bore the scratches from Hassan's fingernails, and her ribs ached from the elbow strikes he'd managed to land during their final struggle. But she was alive, mobile, and had accomplished something that Donnelly's entire mission plan couldn't have achieved: the elimination of a high-value target without American casualties or collateral damage. Overwatch, what's the status of the official mission? Sullivan's team just reached the primary target area. They're reporting no resistance and finding abandoned positions. I think they're starting to realize that something significant happened before they arrived. Rachel smiled grimly as she resumed her movement toward the base. Sullivan, Martinez, and Davis were about to discover that the pretty princess they'd been dismissing for months had just saved their lives by eliminating the threat that would have killed them all. The irony wasn't lost on her. The soldiers who'd spent the most time questioning her competence were now benefiting directly from skills they'd refused to acknowledge. Her radio crackled with Sullivan's voice on the tactical frequency. Confusion evident in his transmission. Command, we're at the primary target location, but something's wrong. The compound appears to have been abandoned in haste. No sign of Hassan or his security forces. Donnelly's response came back immediately, sharp with frustration. Negative, Sullivan. Intelligence confirmed Hassan's presence less than an hour ago. Expand your search pattern and locate the target. Rachel could hear the tension building in the radio traffic as Sullivan's team tried to make sense of a tactical situation that didn't match their briefing materials. They'd arrived expecting to find a heavily defended compound full of terrorists ready for a firefight, only to discover empty buildings and abandoned equipment. Without understanding what had actually happened, they were operating blind in an environment that could still contain significant threats. "Ghost," Rodriguez's voice whispered through Rachel's earpiece, "you need to know that Sullivan's team found Hassan's body. They're requesting immediate extraction and a full investigation into what happened." Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Finding Hassan's body would inevitably lead to questions about how he'd been killed and who was responsible for his elimination. The precision of his execution and the absence of gunshot wounds would suggest professional military training rather than terrorist-on-terrorist violence. It wouldn't take long for investigators to realize that an American soldier had been responsible. What's Donnelly's reaction? He's furious. Keeps demanding to know how Hassan was eliminated without his knowledge. He's ordered a full sweep of the area and launched an investigation into potential unauthorized operations. Rachel reached a ridge that provided overwatch of both Hassan's compound and the route back to forward operating base Iron Ridge. Through her night vision scope, she could see Sullivan's team moving through the abandoned compound with the cautious movements of soldiers who realized they were dealing with something beyond their understanding. Vehicle lights from additional American forces were approaching from the direction of the base, suggesting that Donnelly had called for reinforcements and investigative support. Her extraction route would take her past the outer perimeter of the official operation, where American soldiers were establishing a security cordon around the compound. Getting back to base without being detected would require careful timing and the kind of tactical patience that had served her well during the Hassan elimination. "Overwatch, I'm going to need a distraction to get past the security perimeter. Can you create some kind of communications issue that draws attention away from my infiltration route?" "Already on it," Rodriguez replied. "Stand by for fireworks." 2 minutes later, Rachel heard the distinctive sound of electronic jamming equipment activating. Communications between the various American units became garbled and intermittent, forcing commanders to reposition their forces and establish alternative communication methods. The resulting confusion created exactly the kind of distraction Rachel needed to slip past the security cordon without detection. Moving through the American perimeter required different skills than infiltrating enemy territory. American soldiers were better trained, more disciplined, and equipped with superior night vision and surveillance equipment. But they were also operating under rules of engagement that assumed threats would come from outside their security cordon, not from within their own ranks. Rachel used this assumption to her advantage, timing her movement to coincide with shift changes and communication failures that temporarily degraded the security cordon's effectiveness. Her knowledge of American tactical procedures allowed her to predict where guards would be positioned and how their attention would be focused, creating windows of opportunity for undetected movement. The base perimeter appeared ahead of her like a beacon of safety in potential catastrophe. Getting back inside would officially end her unauthorized operation, but it would also put her in position to face questions about her whereabouts during the evening's events. Donnelly's investigation would inevitably focus on personnel who had the training and opportunity to conduct the kind of operation that had eliminated Hassan. Rachel's radio buzzed with an encrypted message from Rodriguez. "Base security is conducting accountability checks on all personnel. You need to be in your quarters in the next 10 minutes or questions are going to be asked." The timeline was impossibly tight. Rachel was still 15 minutes from base, and her route required navigating the same perimeter defenses that had challenged her departure hours earlier. But the alternative was facing official investigation into her unauthorized activities, which would inevitably lead to court-martial and the end of her military career. She began moving toward the base with the desperate urgency of someone whose professional survival depended on reaching safety before administrative machinery could catch up with tactical reality. Behind her, Hassan's compound continued to swarm with American investigators trying to understand how their primary target had been eliminated without their knowledge or participation. Sullivan's voice echoed through the tactical frequency, bewildered and increasingly concerned. "Command, Hassan appears to have been killed in close-quarters combat. The condition of the body suggests professional military training rather than terrorist activity." Donnelly's response was immediate and predictable. "Impossible. No American forces were authorized for close-quarters engagement with the target. Continue your investigation and report any evidence of unauthorized personnel in the area." Rachel smiled grimly as she approached the final obstacle between her current position and the safety of her quarters. Donnelly's refusal to consider the possibility that unauthorized American forces might have conducted a successful operation would buy her precious time to establish an alibi and prepare for the inevitable questions. But as she prepared to infiltrate the base perimeter for the second time in one evening, Rachel realized that her problems were just beginning. Hassan's elimination had been the easy part. Now she had to survive the investigation, protect Rodriguez from consequences, and find a way to turn tactical success into official vindication. The base lights appeared ahead of her, harsh and unforgiving in the desert darkness. In a few minutes, she would officially transition from unauthorized operator back to pretty princess, the marginalized soldier that her colleagues expected to find filing reports and avoiding real military work. What they would actually find was someone who had just demonstrated capabilities that would force them to completely reconsider their assumptions about what she was capable of accomplishing. When she stopped asking for permission to do her job, the real challenge was just beginning. But for the first time in months, Rachel Blackwood felt like she was fighting from a position of strength rather than weakness. Hassan was dead, American soldiers were alive, and everyone who'd underestimated her was about to learn exactly how wrong their assumptions had been. Time to face the consequences of proving them wrong. The knock on Rachel's door came at 0630 hours, exactly 12 hours after she'd slipped back into her quarters with minutes to spare before the base-wide accountability check. She'd spent those hours in a state of controlled readiness, cleaning her equipment, reviewing her alibi, and preparing for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. The successful elimination of Hassan had saved American lives, but it had also created exactly the kind of situation that would force a reckoning with the systematic discrimination that had defined her military experience. Colonel Donnelly stood in her doorway, flanked by 2 military police officers and Lieutenant Thompson, their expressions ranging from barely controlled fury to professional curiosity. Donnelly's face was flushed with the kind of anger that came from having his tactical competence publicly undermined, while Thompson looked like someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit any of his preconceived assumptions. "Sergeant Blackwood," Donnelly began, his voice tight with controlled hostility, "you are ordered to report to Conference Room Alpha for immediate questioning regarding last night's operations in Sector 7. Rachel stood and faced Donnelly directly, her posture reflecting the confidence of someone who understood that her tactical success had fundamentally altered the power dynamics between them. "Yes, sir. May I ask what specific aspects of last night's operations require my input?" Donnelly's jaw tightened. ISIS commander Amir Hassan was found dead in circumstances that suggest American military involvement. Since you were not part of the authorized mission, I need to understand your whereabouts and activities during the relevant time period. Of course, sir. I was monitoring communications from the base as assigned. For the entire evening? Yes, sir. From 1900 hours until approximately 0200 hours, when the official mission returned to base. It was a careful half-truth that would stand up to initial scrutiny while buying Rachel time to assess how much evidence Donnelly actually possessed. The communications logs would show her presence at the radio console during the critical hours, but detailed investigation would reveal gaps that corresponded to her unauthorized operation. Conference Room Alpha felt like a courtroom designed to intimidate rather than illuminate. Donnelly presided from behind a conference table covered with photographs, intelligence reports, and what appeared to be preliminary forensic analysis of Hassan's compound. Thompson sat to his right with a laptop and recording equipment, while the military police officers positioned themselves near the door in a way that suggested Rachel was being treated as a potential suspect rather than a witness. Sergeant Blackwood, Donnelly began formally. What can you tell me about the elimination of ISIS commander Amir Hassan? I can tell you that it represents a significant tactical victory for coalition forces, sir. Hassan was responsible for multiple attacks against American personnel, and his elimination will disrupt terrorist operations throughout this region. Donnelly's expression darkened. That wasn't what I asked. I want to know how Hassan was killed and who was responsible for his death. Sir, I was monitoring communications from the base during last night's operation. My knowledge of events in Sector 7 is limited to radio traffic from the official mission. Radio traffic that would have included reports of Hassan's elimination. Sir, the official mission reported finding an abandoned compound with no sign of the primary target. I heard no reports of Hassan's elimination during my communications monitoring. It was another careful half-truth that exploited gaps in Donnelly's knowledge while establishing Rachel's official position. Thompson looked up from his laptop with an expression that suggested he was beginning to see inconsistencies in the official narrative. Colonel, Thompson said carefully, the forensic analysis shows that Hassan was killed in hand-to-hand combat by someone with advanced military training. The technique used to eliminate him suggests special operations background rather than conventional infantry. Donnelly turned to face Thompson with irritation. Your point, Lieutenant? Sir, Sergeant Blackwood's training records show extensive hand-to-hand combat instruction, including advanced techniques taught only to personnel expected to operate in close-quarters environments. The observation hung in the air like an accusation. Rachel felt the focus of the room shift toward her as Donnelly processed the implication that his pretty princess might have possessed the skills necessary to eliminate a high-value terrorist target in single combat. Sergeant Blackwood, Donnelly said slowly, are you telling me that you had no involvement in Hassan's elimination? Rachel met his gaze directly. Sir, I'm telling you that I followed my assigned duties and monitored communications as ordered. If Hassan was eliminated by American forces, it represents a significant tactical success that saved the lives of the soldiers assigned to your mission. My mission was compromised by unauthorized interference. Sir, your mission was compromised by inadequate intelligence and poor tactical planning that would have resulted in American casualties. The words were out before Rachel could stop them, and the room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of her statement. She had just directly challenged Donnelly's tactical competence in front of witnesses, crossing a line that would inevitably force a confrontation about leadership, judgment, and the systematic exclusion of qualified personnel from combat operations. Donnelly's face went white with rage. Sergeant, you are in no position to critique tactical decisions made by your commanding officer. With respect, sir, I'm in an excellent position to critique tactical decisions that ignore available intelligence and put American lives at unnecessary risk. Thompson looked between Rachel and Donnelly with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. The military police officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain about their role in what was becoming a fundamental challenge. To command authority. Sir, Thompson said carefully, perhaps we should focus on the objective facts. Hassan is dead, American casualties were avoided, and the mission objective was achieved. The mission objective was achieved through insubordination and unauthorized action, Donnelly snapped. That cannot be tolerated regardless of the outcome. Rachel stood, her patience finally exhausted by months of systematic discrimination and tactical incompetence. Colonel, with respect, your mission plan was flawed from the beginning. Hassan knew you were coming. His compound was prepared for frontal assault, and your chosen personnel lacked the experience necessary to handle a professional terrorist with 5 years of operational experience. You were excluded from the mission because you lacked the temperament and judgment necessary for combat operations. I was excluded from the mission because I don't fit your stereotype of what a warrior should look like. Rachel replied evenly. My service record, training scores, and combat experience all indicate superior qualifications for the type of operation you attempted. The room erupted as Donnelly rose from his chair, his face flushed with the kind of anger that came from having fundamental assumptions challenged in public. Sergeant Blackwood, you are relieved of duty pending a full investigation into your activities and attitude. Sir, Thompson interrupted, I think we need to consider the broader implications of this situation. What broader implications? Sir, if Hassan was eliminated by unauthorized American forces, it suggests that our personnel assignment and mission planning processes may need review. Someone with the skills necessary to accomplish what happened last night has been excluded from combat operations for 8 months. Thompson's observation cut to the heart of the matter. Hassan's elimination had demonstrated capabilities that Donnelly's personnel management had systematically ignored, raising questions about how many other qualified soldiers had been sidelined. Due to prejudices rather than performance, the door to Conference Room Alpha opened, and Master Sergeant Rodriguez entered carrying a thick folder that Rachel recognized as her complete service record. Rodriguez's expression was grim but determined, and her presence suggested that the confrontation was about to expand beyond Rachel's individual situation. Colonel Donnelly, Rodriguez said formally, I have information relevant to this investigation that I believe requires immediate attention. Donnelly looked at Rodriguez with suspicion. What kind of information? Information about systematic discrimination in personnel assignments, suppression of qualified soldiers based on gender rather than capability, and tactical decisions that have consistently placed American lives at unnecessary risk. Rodriguez opened her folder and placed a series of documents on the conference table. Sir, I've compiled a complete analysis of mission assignments, personnel evaluations, and tactical decisions made by this command over the past 8 months. The pattern that emerges raises serious questions about leadership competence and adherence to military equal opportunity policies. Rachel felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. Rodriguez wasn't just defending her individual case, she was challenging the entire system that had enabled Donnelly's discriminatory practices. The investigation was expanding beyond Hassan's elimination to encompass broader questions about command effectiveness and military justice. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, I have communications intercepts that confirm Hassan's advanced knowledge of last night's official mission, intelligence assessments that predicted the failure of the planned assault, and tactical alternatives that were ignored despite their superior probability of success. Donnelly stared at the documents with the expression of someone watching his career collapse in real time. Sergeant Rodriguez, you're making serious accusations against your commanding officer. Sir, I'm presenting evidence of systematic failures in leadership and tactical decision-making that have compromised mission effectiveness and endangered American personnel. Thompson looked up from reviewing Rodriguez's documents, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. Colonel, this intelligence suggests that last night's mission was compromised from the beginning. If Hassan had advance warning and prepared positions, the official assault would have resulted in multiple American casualties. Rachel watched as the truth of the situation became clear to everyone in the room. Her unauthorized operation hadn't just eliminated a high-value target. It had prevented a disaster that would have cost American lives and represented a tactical failure for coalition forces. The pretty princess they'd been excluding from combat operations had just demonstrated superior tactical judgment to the commanding officer who'd been marginalizing her. The reckoning Rodriguez had promised was finally beginning, and Rachel realized that Hassan's elimination had been just the opening move in a much larger confrontation about competence, prejudice, and what it really meant to serve with distinction in the American military. 3 weeks after the Hassan elimination, Rachel Blackwood stood in the same conference room where Donnelly had tried to destroy her career, but everything had changed. The investigation that had begun as an attempt to prosecute her for unauthorized operations had evolved into a comprehensive review of command practices, personnel policies, and tactical decision-making that reached far beyond forward operating base Iron Ridge. Brigadier General Patricia Hayes sat at the head of the conference table, her weathered face bearing the kind of scars that came from actual combat leadership rather than administrative advancement. Hayes had arrived from Central Command with a reputation for cutting through military bureaucracy to focus on results, and her presence signaled that Rachel's situation had attracted attention at the highest levels of military leadership. "Sergeant Blackwood," General Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through competence rather than politics, "the investigation into your unauthorized operation has concluded. I'm here to discuss both the consequences of your actions and their implications for military policy more broadly." Rachel sat at attention, her uniform bearing the same crisp precision that had defined her appearance throughout months of systematic exclusion from combat operations. But her posture reflected something new: confidence that came from having proven her capabilities under the most challenging circumstances possible. "Ma'am, I accept full responsibility for my decision to operate outside official channels. My actions were unauthorized, but they were necessary to prevent American casualties and eliminate a legitimate terrorist target." General Hayes nodded, consulting a thick folder that Rachel recognized as the comprehensive investigation file compiled over the previous weeks. "Your operation eliminated ISIS commander Amir Hassan, disrupted terrorist networks throughout this region, and prevented what our analysis suggests would have been a catastrophic failure of the official mission." The words hung in the conference room air like a formal verdict. Thompson, who sat to Hayes' right as the investigating officer, had spent weeks documenting the chain of events that led to Rachel's unauthorized action. His findings had painted a picture of systematic discrimination, tactical incompetence, and missed opportunities that extended far beyond her individual case. "Furthermore," Hayes continued, "the investigation has revealed patterns of personnel management and tactical decision-making that represent serious failures in military leadership. Colonel Donnelly's exclusion of qualified personnel based on gender rather than capability has been detrimental to mission effectiveness and contrary to military policy." Rachel felt a surge of vindication mixed with concern for the soldiers who had served under Donnelly's flawed leadership. Her individual situation had been resolved, but the broader questions about military culture and equal opportunity would require systemic changes that extended far beyond any single command. "Ma'am, what happened to Colonel Donnelly?" "Colonel Donnelly has been relieved of command and transferred to a staff position, where his personnel management decisions will be subject to greater oversight. His replacement, Colonel Sarah Martinez, has extensive combat experience and a demonstrated commitment to merit-based leadership." Thompson looked up from his notes. "General, what about the other soldiers who may have been affected by similar discrimination?" "We're conducting a broader review of personnel assignments and promotion decisions across multiple commands. Your investigation, Lieutenant Thompson, has identified systemic issues that require comprehensive solutions." Hayes turned her attention back to Rachel, her expression shifting from official business to something that approached personal interest. "Sergeant Blackwood, Your unauthorized operation demonstrated tactical excellence and strategic judgment that this command has been systematically ignoring. The question now is how we integrate those capabilities into official operations. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. After months of exclusion and marginalization, she was being offered something she'd almost stopped hoping for: recognition based on performance rather than prejudice. "Ma'am, I'm prepared to serve in whatever capacity best serves the mission. And my fellow soldiers." "Good, because I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to staff sergeant and assignment as senior instructor for advanced tactical operations. Your experience with urban warfare and counter-terrorism will be valuable for training the next generation of soldiers." The promotion was significant, but the assignment was even more important. Rachel would be responsible for teaching other soldiers the skills that had enabled her to eliminate Hassan and prevent American casualties. Her exclusion from combat operations was ending with her elevation to a position where she could influence how future operations were planned and executed. Additionally, Hayes continued, "Special Operations Command has expressed interest in your capabilities. If you're interested, there's an opportunity for advanced training that could lead to assignment with units that specialize in the kind of surgical operations you conducted against Hassan." Rachel's mind raced with the implications. Special operations represented the highest level of military professionalism, where performance mattered more than politics and where her gender would be less relevant than her ability to accomplish impossible missions. It was an opportunity that would have been unimaginable under Donnelly's leadership. "Ma'am, I'm very interested in that opportunity." Thompson closed his investigation file and looked at Rachel with something approaching admiration. "Sergeant Blackwood, I want you to know that your case has changed how I think about military leadership and personnel management. What you accomplished shouldn't have required unauthorized action. It should have been recognized and supported from the beginning." General Hayes stood, signaling the formal conclusion of the investigation. "Sergeant Blackwood, your actions saved American lives and eliminated a significant terrorist threat. While I cannot officially endorse unauthorized operations, I can recognize exceptional results achieved through exceptional competence." As the meeting concluded, Rachel found herself alone with Rodriguez, who had remained quietly supportive throughout the investigation process. The senior NCO's decision to provide intelligence support for Rachel's operation had also been reviewed, but her extensive service record and reputation for integrity had protected her from serious consequences. "Carmen," Rachel said quietly, "thank you. None of this would have been possible without your support." Rodriguez smiled, the expression carrying satisfaction mixed with vindication. "Rachel, I've been waiting 15 years to see someone like you prove that competence matters more than conformity. What you did wasn't just about eliminating Hassan. It was about demonstrating that this military is stronger when we use all our capabilities, not just the ones that fit traditional stereotypes." 6 months later, Rachel stood on the same tarmac where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. Her new rank insignia reflected the promotion that had accompanied her transition to instructor duties, and her assignment orders bore the seal of Special Operations Command. The Pretty Princess nickname had disappeared, replaced by the kind of professional respect that came from proven combat effectiveness. "Jake," Sullivan approached her as she prepared to leave Forward Operating Base Iron Ridge for advanced training. The soldier who had once taunted her with dismissive comments now looked at her with undisguised respect and something that might have been gratitude. "Rachel," Sullivan said, using her first name with the familiarity of someone who understood. They owed their life to her tactical judgment. "I want you to know that what you did out there ... it changed how I think about a lot of things. Jake, you're a good soldier. You just needed to learn that good soldiers come in different packages than you expected." Sullivan nodded, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about that night a lot. If you hadn't acted when you did, Martinez Davis and I would probably be dead right now." We walked into that compound completely unprepared for what Hassan had waiting for us. You would have figured it out, Rachel replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. Maybe, but the point is we shouldn't have had to. Your tactical assessment was better than Donnelly's from the beginning, and we should have been listening to you instead of dismissing you. As Rachel prepared to board the transport aircraft that would take her to the next phase of her military career, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from marginalized support personnel to recognized tactical expert. Hassan's elimination had been just the beginning. The real victory was the systematic change that had followed, opening opportunities for other soldiers who had been excluded based on prejudices rather than performance. The aircraft engines roared to life with a sound that reminded Rachel of possibility rather than exclusion. She was no longer fighting for the right to prove herself. She was preparing to teach others that excellence came in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous assumption a military could make was underestimating the soldiers it chose to overlook. For anyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told they didn't belong, Rachel's story served as a reminder that competence always finds a way to demonstrate itself. Sometimes it just takes a terrorist commander's death and a military career's worth of vindication to get people's attention. The pretty princess they had all underestimated was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most powerful response to discrimination was simply proving them wrong. Hassan had learned that lesson too late, but the American military was still learning to benefit from it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.